Hey everyone, welcome back to ONYX Pages. You asked, I answered. Here are the best books I read in 2025. See you in a second. Coming in at number 5 is Black Girl Unlimited by Echo Brown. So let me tell you a little bit about how I discovered this book. Many years ago, I was on booktube and a number of people started talking about this book, and I heard the word black girl, I heard wizard, and I thought this is definitely a book for me. But then I started to hear many content creators talking about how this book was not what they expected. It was much grittier. It was much darker than they thought. There were more trigger warnings that should have been given before, and they were just really surprised by the content. And so because it was a really sort of challenging time in the world and a challenging time in my own life, I thought, you know what? I'm not sure that I'm ready for a book that is as gritty and as dark as everyone is saying. Now, what I'll say is, I have no problem with gritty, dark books. In fact, those tend to be my go-to books. But I was a little bit concerned about something that might feel like it was gratuitously violent. So I don't really like books where the violence is just there with no complexity, no nuance, there's no resolution, there's just this violence and violence and violence and violence and violence, and I didn't want to read that. I don't like reading books like that. So what I decided to do instead was just wait until I was ready to read this book. So at the end of last year, I think this might have been the second last book I read, I thought, let me just try this, because there is something about a book that really revolves around a black girl who is coming into her own sense of her own power and her own knowledge. And I guess I'm at a time in my life where I just want the black girls to win every single time, and I want them to win in a really big way, and I want them to discover that they have power. And so this idea of black girls being unlimited felt really real to me, and so I picked it up. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the blurb and about the author, and then I'm going to tell you why I like the cover, and then we'll sort of get into my thoughts on the book and why it made number 5. Echo Brown is a wizard from the east side of Cleveland, where apartments are small and parents suffer addictions to the white rocks. Yet there is magic everywhere. New portals begin to open when Echo transfers to the rich white school on the west side, and an insightful teacher becomes a pivotal mentor. Each day, Echo travels between worlds, leaving her brothers, her friends, and a piece of herself on the east side. There are dangers to leaving behind the place that made you. Echo soon recognizes the pain flowing through everyone around her, and a black veil of depression threatens to undo everything she's worked for. Heavily autobiographical and infused with magical realism, Black Girl Unlimited fearlessly explores the intersections of poverty, sexual violence, depression, racism, and sexism. I will say that the description of the book is really accurate. It doesn't give you a lot of spoilers, but it does give you a sense of some of the themes that you're going to encounter. And I would say that all of those themes, depression, anxiety, sexual violence, poverty, all of that definitely came through in the book, and it was on page. So if you are not ready to read a book like that, then it's not the time, and it might not be the book for you. I'll tell you a little bit about the author. Echo Brown is a writer and storyteller from Cleveland, Ohio. She's best known for her one-woman show, Black Virgins Are Not for Hipsters, which Alice Walker praised. Not since early Whoopi Goldberg have I been so moved by a performer's narrative. She's primarily based in Paris, France, and Oakland, California. This was the first, I think this was the first I've ever read of Echo Brown, and I really loved her writing style. As I've said before in previous videos, liminal was the word for my reading in 2025 and also into 2026. And liminal means to me that transition space. So the moment between A and B, right? That sort of dark, unspoken, sometimes ephemeral space between being, right? And I really love authors who can write in that space, who can take you right into that middle space, that transition space, the space between light and dark, between day and night, between child and youth, or youth and adult, or adult and elder. That moment where the magic is actually happening, not before the magic happened and not after the magic happened, but as the magic is happening while you are traveling through time, while you're traveling through space. So I love writers who can hold us in that moment of transition and keep us there. Let us luxuriate and linger in those moments. That is what I love. And Echo Brown did that really well. Let's talk about the cover. The cover is super lovely. I love the blues, the pinks, the grays, the blacks, the brown. There's a little bit of red if you look really closely. And if after you've read the book, you can definitely see sort of what is going on this cover. So it's a beautiful book, beautiful cover. The blurb is honest, and I really like what we learn about Echo Brown. So the reason why this made my top 5 list is because I really like the way that the book was set up. The chapters are this. I'll just read some of the chapters. Just listen to the words. So, Lesson 1, Building the Perfect Shell. Lesson 2, Making Something Out of Nothing. Lesson 3, Reaching the In-Between. Lesson 4, Stopping the Time. Lesson 5, Unburying Yourself. So if you think about it, there are 19 chapters. Each is called lesson number whatever. And these are lessons that, if you just read it without knowing anything about the book, these are lessons that many Black young women have to learn. Whether they're good lessons or bad lessons, they're lessons that we learn. And I found that as I was reading this book, I was really connecting with the young part of me. And I found that these stories gave me an opportunity to revisit some of the choices that I made when I was a teenager and when I was in my early 20s, and hold myself in grace because I was just figuring it all out. And the main character is also figuring it all out. And does she do some stupid stuff? Yes, she does. And is she immature? Yes, she is. And is she strong? 100%. And is she magical? Without a doubt. And so I really enjoyed the way that this book allowed the reader to get inside the main character's mind as she encounters all of these really challenging things in her life, right? Drug addiction and violence and poverty and racism and sexism and sexual violence. And as she's encountering all of this in her neighborhood, in her home, in her community, and in her schools, she's also recognizing that she has all of these amazing skills that she can bring to bear and that can help her and also help other people. And there were so many moments in this story where she just felt real to me. You know, I just wanted to give her a hug at the end of the day. So I would recommend Black Girl Unlimited. I would recommend it for those who are interested in the speculative, sort of magical realism, subtle magic side of things. Yes, there's definitely like capital M magic. There is some ancestral magic. There is dimensional magic. You know, there's a little bit of like what's going on, a little bit of confusion here, a little bit of transportation from one place to another without giving it all away. So if you want that kind of magic coming into real life, right? Combined with a coming of age story set in a neighborhood that is just going through it and told through the perspective of a young girl who's lovable, even while she can be very frustrating, then I would definitely recommend Black Girl Unlimited. And this was my number 5 in my top 5. If you're enjoying my top 5 so far, please hit that like button. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. That really helps me out. And feel free to leave a comment below. I really like cascading comments where you're just commenting as you watch the video and then you're replying to yourself. Try those cascading comments and see how it feels for you. I certainly love them. Coming in at number 4, we've got The Reformatory by the amazing Tananarive Due. If you have not read Tananarive Due, this is your sign from the universe and also from ONYX pages to do so. I love Tananarive Due's writing. I find that no matter what book I read that she's written, it's definitely got a lot of history in it. I consider her to be a historian. Her parents were involved in the civil rights movement. She was as a child. She actually co-wrote a sort of historical autobiography with her mother about being a mother and daughter going through the civil rights movement. I think she teaches at UCLA Afrofuturism and horror, Black horror. She is known in the community as an expert in Afrofuturism and an expert in Black horror. She's just really cool. If you're interested in Tananarive Due and you want to learn a little bit more about her, way back when I started this channel, I had the pleasure of interviewing her, and I will link that interview at somewhere, either in the description or in one of the cards above. So I've had The Reformatory on my shelves for a while, and sometimes when I have read a lot of what the author has written, I wait before I read their newest work. And I kind of felt like I haven't read everything that Tananarive Due has written. I've read her African Immortals series, which is Black Vampires, which is awesome. I read her Ghost Summer, which was a collection of short stories, which also very, very awesome. I read Joplin's Ghost, also really awesome. So a lot of horror, a lot of vampires, a lot of really cool stuff. There is a newer collection of short stories that I haven't read as yet. But I won't lie, this is like a 400, it's a 550. This is a tome, and I wasn't sure in 2025 if I would have the reading stamina to get into a tome. But toward the end of the year, I somehow found the ability to read something this long, and I got into it. So that is why I read The Reformatory. And I came into this writing expecting excellence because it's Tananarive Due. And did I get excellence? Yes, I got excellence. So let me tell you a little bit about the book by reading the synopsis, and then I'll read Tananarive Due's bio for those of you who are not familiar with her writing, and then we'll get into what I thought of the book and why it made it to number 4. Gracetown, Florida, June 1950. 12-year-old Robbie Stevens Jr. is sentenced to 6 months at the Gracetown School for Boys for kicking the son of the largest landowner in town in defense of his older sister, Gloria. So begins Robbie's journey further into the terrors of the Jim Crow South and the very real horror of the school they call the Reformatory. Robbie has a talent for seeing ghosts or haints, but what was once a comfort to him after the loss of his mother has become a window into the truth of what happens at the Reformatory. Boys forced to work to remediate their so-called crimes have gone missing, but the haints Robbie sees hint at worse things. Through his friends Redbone and Blue, Robbie is learning not just the rules, but how to survive. Meanwhile, Gloria is rallying every family member and connection in Florida to find a way to get Robbie out before it's too late. The Reformatory is a haunting work of historical fiction, written as only American Book Award-winning author Tananarive Due could, by piecing together the life of the relative of her family never spoke of, bringing his tragedy and those of so many others at the infamous Dozier School for Boys to light in this riveting novel. So before I get into talking a little bit about Tananarive Due, one of the reasons why I was so interested in this book is because it has a connection to a family member. I live in Canada, and so residential schools for Indigenous children is just something that we should all know about, something definitely that I know a lot about. And I was really curious about this idea that there was a residential school for boys in Florida in the 1950s that her uncle went into and maybe never came out of. And because I read with purpose, I'm very interested in those stories that are, yes, fictional, but that help us make sense of what we're seeing around us so that we don't forget where we came from, and we don't notice and recognize too late that we are in a crisis point, right? Or in a crisis or at a crisis point. And so I was really interested in a story that sort of described how a young person could end up in a place like that in the 1950s, how a black young boy could end up in a residential school that was horrific, and, you know, could he have a happy ending? So that was another reason why I wanted to read this. And as I was reading it, I just thought about the transformative power of writing and what it means for Tananarive Due to write this, yes, fictional story about a family member and how healing that hopefully was for her, and difficult. So who's Tananarive Due? Tananarive Due is an American Book Award-winning and Essence best-selling author of 16 books, including Blood Colony, The Living Blood, The Good House, Joplin's Ghost, and Devil's Wake. She was also a contributor to Jonathan Mayberry's middle-grade anthology, Don't Turn Out the Lights. She has won an NAACP Image Award and a British Fantasy Award. She teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She also won an Ignite Award, I believe, from FICON. So if you look at the cover, really interesting, beautiful. I love the different shades, like the ombre from a pale orange all the way to a dark burgundy and to a black. I love the house on the hill, and like that tree, the tree behind the house, and just, yeah, you end up figuring out what this house is a little bit later. And if you look at the back of the book, there's a lot of acclaim for this book, including from Victor Laval and Stephen Graham Jones, names that I recognize, both writers that I've read who write incredible horror based from racialized experiences, from Black in terms of Victor Laval and also Indigenous in terms of Stephen Graham Jones. And they both have to say amazing things about this book. So of course, you sort of know you're getting into an amazing feast. So, why did I love this book so much? It's told from the perspective, primarily told from the perspective of children, Robbie and his sister Gloria. And so of course, even though this is not a middle grade or a young adult book, the fact that it's written from the perspective of children, but for an adult audience, is so wonderful. You get to be inside the decisions of these children main characters as they try to manage the horror of basically living by themselves. So both Robbie and his sister Gloria, they live together, but their mother has passed and their father is on the run. And so Gloria, who's the older sister, is basically taking care of Robbie. So they're kind of alone and independent. Gloria works as a maid and Robbie is in school. And so, you know, they have to keep a lot of secrets for their family. And so they're really living in tough times, right? And so as the synopsis indicates, Gloria and Robbie are walking along, minding their own young Black business, and the white male son of a rich family tries to sexually harass Gloria, and Robbie comes to her defense and ends up kicking him, right? And that is how he ends up in the reformatory after going to court as a child. And so all of a sudden you see all of these systemic injustices that these children face, right? They're encountering the police, they're encountering the court system, they're encountering child welfare, they're encountering this residential school, and then all of the people and the communities who hold up those systems and allow them to exist, right? And so just for me, I found it really interesting to watch the layers and layers and layers and layers of injustice these young children had to survive through. And because they're children, their hopes and their gumption and their courage was just so high that things that maybe an adult wouldn't do or wouldn't try to do, they tried to do because they're kids and anything is possible. And so it was this really interesting dynamic between these children being like, you know, Gloria being like, I'm gonna get my brother out no matter what, and I don't care what you do, I need him back, right? And Robbie sort of being like, oh my gosh, I'm in this world, how do I survive? Where's my sister? And then all these adults being like, oh, we're gonna do our best, but you know, it's really hard to do this. Like, we've seen this happen for years, and this is a secret school, right? And so it was just really interesting to see the hopefulness of these young people, and then like these tired adults who are just like, gosh, this system is this system, but we'll try our best. So that dynamic is really cool. And then the fear, right? The fear that Gloria has of, I'm never going to see Robbie again. The fear that Robbie has that he's never going to see Gloria again. So we spent some time at the beginning of the book, and I've heard critiques that we spent too much time at the beginning of the book following Gloria and her efforts to like galvanize the adults to help get Robbie out of the school, and not enough time with Robbie at the school. I hear that critique. I didn't mind it, but it did, you know, I did prefer the story of Robbie in the school. And the reason why is because both Robbie and Gloria are having to interact with magical things in their own way, right? And for that reason, it was fine for me to sort of follow Gloria and see how her magical intuition skills were developing, and then to see on the flip side how Robbie's was. Like, it was kind of like these two parallel stories. They start together, Robbie and Gloria, and then they end up far apart, and then we hope they'll get together by the end. We hope there's going to be a happy ending. And so I feel like we needed both of those stories to be sort of parallel, sort of like an above and below. Gloria on the outside trying to figure out how to save her brother, Robbie on the inside trying to figure out how to get out. Like, there was just something about the yin and yang of the story that I really liked. Inside the school was a whole other set of horrors for Robbie, right? So of the supernatural type, and then also of the very mundane human, like the horror of white supremacy, the injustice of it, the horror of, you know, living in an environment where literally no one cares about you except to the extent that you can produce labor, right? And to have a child go through this. So it was very interesting to see Robbie try to navigate this school, to try and figure out how to get out, to try and make friends. There are a few plot lines in terms of his relationships at the school that got dropped along the way in lieu of the larger sort of, you know, story about whether Robbie will be able to get out. But again, I didn't really mind that. I feel like the world was fleshed out really well. I got enough of what I wanted to see. Maybe when I do my standalone review, I'll have a different view, but just sort of looking back and thinking about the reading experience and my ability to sort of stay connected with the plot, this was a fantastic book. And the ending was thrilling. The ending was thrilling. The crisis was so clear. The climax was so potent. And to the last few pages, right? The last few pages, I was literally like reading with my hands clutched onto the book, hoping for the end that I wanted. Did I get it? You will have to read to find out. But suffice to say that this ended up on my top 5 list at number 4. So I definitely recommend that you read The Reformatory if you're interested in some horror, some speculative elements, and also, though, the horror of the politics of white supremacy as it plays out in the 1950s in the context of boys who make mistakes. So there you go, The Reformatory. I hope you're enjoying my top 5 books of 2025. So far, we've talked about The Reformatory and Black Girl Unlimited, and if you have read either of those books and you want to tell me what you thought of them, please leave a comment below. Coming in at number 3, my friends, it is Lone Women by Victor LaValle. Okay, so why did I pick up this book? First of all, everybody has been telling me about Victor LaValle. Like everyone. And I haven't read a lot of Victor LaValle's work. I am just starting to read the horror side of Black speculative. I think I really started that in earnest in 2025. And so even though I've had access to Victor LaValle's works, I didn't really kind of jump into them because I kind of had them in the horror part of my brain. But I have read a graphic novel by Victor LaValle, and it is sort of like a Frankenstein reimagining from the perspective of a Black woman who is I believe she's like a scientist, and her son gets killed. And so she has to reckon with that. And that is the graphic novel that I read that was Victor LaValle. And I can't remember the name. Maybe I'll put it up here somewhere. But I really enjoyed that. And I thought, oh my gosh, I need to read more Victor LaValle. So when I came across Lone Woman and I read the synopsis, I thought, you know what? This might be the Victor LaValle book that I read next. I was very, very interested in the idea of lone women. Like, what does that mean? A woman by herself? Okay, so as a woman who spends a lot of time by herself and enjoys being by herself and traveling by herself and adventuring by herself, I was like, let me see what this story can help me understand about myself, what questions it'll help me to explore about being alone, right? Being lone as a woman. And as we can see on the cover, a Black woman with cornrows. So many curiosities. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book by reading the synopsis. I'll then go into a little bit more about Victor LaValle by reading his bio, and then we're going to talk about the cover and get into the book. A woman with a past, a mysterious trunk, a town on the edge of nowhere, and a bracing new vision of the American West from award-winning author of The Changeling. Adelaide Henry carries an enormous steamer trunk with her wherever she goes. It's locked at all times, because when the trunk opens, people around Adelaide start to disappear. The year is 1915, and Adelaide is in trouble. Her secret sin killed her parents, forcing her to flee California in a hellfire rush and make her way to Montana as a homesteader. Dragging the trunk with her at every stop, she will become one of the lone women taking advantage of the government's offer of free land for those who can tame it. Except that Adelaide isn't alone. And the secret she's tried so desperately to lock away might be the only thing that will help her survive this harsh territory. Crafted by a modern master of magical suspense, Lone Women blends shimmering prose, an unforgettable cast of adventurers who find horror and sisterhood in a brutal landscape, and a portrait of early 20th century America like you've never seen. And at its heart is the gripping story of a woman desperate to bury her past or redeem it. All right, so just off the synopsis, the idea that Adelaide Henry has this mysterious trunk that she's dragging across the state with her, I was like, what's in the trunk? I need to know what's in the trunk. And I had all of these thoughts about what was in the trunk. And so I wanted to know, just after reading this synopsis, what she's going to be talking about and what we're going to discover. And for me, I thought that the main question in the story was going to be, what's in Adelaide Henry's trunk? What is she hiding? And I will say the notion of magical suspense, that descriptor is so accurate for this story, because that question does not get answered until way later than I needed, right? And so, which wasn't a bad thing, right? It wasn't a bad thing. One of the things that I loved about this book is that there was layer upon layer upon layer of mystery. There wasn't just one mystery in this story. And the stakes just kept on building higher and higher and higher and higher until the last part of the book, which was masterfully done. But anyway, who's Victor LaValle? Victor LaValle is the author of 8 works of fiction, 5 novels, 2 novellas, and a collection of short stories. He has also written 2 graphic novel series. His novels have been included in Best of the Year lists by the New York Times Book Review, Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, The Nation, and Publishers Weekly, among others. He has been the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, an American Book Award, the Shirley Jackson Award, and the Key to Southeast Queens. He lives in the Bronx with his wife and kids and teaches at Columbia University. Lucky fucking students, okay? So, where do I even start with this? Oh, let's talk about the cover. So, very compelling cover. I like covers that have just one person on them, apparently. I love the landscape. You can see the wind blowing through the trees. You can see like just land with nothing, right? And mountains. And then it looks like she's got a meat cleaver in her hands, but I don't know what that is. And she's just looking off to the side. She is not afraid. She's ready for something. So yes, Victor LaValle. Very good. Lone Woman. Okay, so what did I like about the book? And why did it make number 3 on my top 5? I liked so much about it. So number 1, I loved the historical backdrop. I loved learning a little bit more about the government's project and the opportunity that was left open to women or anybody at the time to settle the land. I don't know anything about homesteading, but I did watch the beginning of a video where Victor LaValle was talking about the research that he did for this book and this idea of homesteaders and how Montana was settled. Very, very interesting that there actually were women and queer women who settled the land because they could. And the idea of just traveling somewhere and surviving on the land by yourself is like, I can't even imagine doing that myself. So like the courage that it would have taken for these real women to do this was amazing. And the fear of the unknown, I just can't imagine it, you know, really intense. So I was really interested in that aspect of it. In addition to wondering what was in this woman's trunk. I did not love Adelaide Henry as a main character. She was definitely compelling and I was very interested in her decision making. I loved her courage. I loved her sense of confidence in herself. I love her moxie. I love her anger, and her pride. She is a very prideful woman, and when she gets angry, she'll punch somebody in the face. And I love that about her. I love her cunning. When she needed to be deceitful, she was deceitful. She's hard to love, hard to like. But she, as the story developed, I kind of understood how she developed that exterior, and I got a bit of an understanding of her interior, right? Like she had to be a caretaker in a way, and at the beginning of the book there's a significant tragedy, and so we see how she manages, but we see why she had to manage making it through. So I found a place in my heart for Adelaide Henry throughout, but I really enjoyed hearing the story from her perspective. I'll also say that the narrator was amazing. I'm just looking at my annotations because I'm not sure that you'll be able to see this really well, but I definitely did mark up the book. Can you see that? I hope you can. There's a lot of markings. The writing, LaValle's writing is so awesome, and the narrator for this was so great. I have scribblings and etchings throughout this book where I'm just like, whew, what happened? This was cool. Why did he do this to us? Amazing, Let me just read something here. It took Adelaide some time to return to common sense. She stood in the doorway, aghast at all she'd seen, unable to understand how quickly bad had gone to much worse. Maybe the boys would go to the law in town. How would she explain a dead woman, a dead white woman, one arm torn away, lying here on her doorstep? What was she going to do? No chance of burying a body in the hard soil. She would have to think of something, but she realized this wasn't exactly the most pressing concern. Right? This kind of when you have Black characters and you're reading horror, the horror of a racially unjust system is always looming in the background. And these books cause us to ask questions like, what's scarier? White supremacy or this huge hulking monster that has my head in its maw? Like, right? And that's funny to me. You know, if you are trying to figure out how to read with purpose during these times, read horror, read Black horror, read Black speculative, because it really helps, you know, when we think about reading with purpose, it really helps to give us some perspective and causes us to think about like all the different layers of horror that we're dealing with in these times. There is a little bit of romance. There's a lot of tenderness between children. There are unlikely allies and situational allies. There's a little bit of like, there's a little bit of like a flirtatious vibe that we see at some points in the book that I just really loved. I love the subtle, sensual, kind of like, oh, hello. I loved reading that. That was very sweet. And yeah, this was just a really thrilling, wonderful read. And once we get to the end and the questions that are asked start getting answered and the layers upon layers upon layers of mystery get revealed and we understand what was in that trunk and why Adelaide had this burden and what she had to do and what her options were and who could help her and who wouldn't and what people would do for each other in community. Once we get there, it was just this intoxicatingly thrilling story. So that was Lone Women by Victor LaValle, number 3. I definitely recommend. Okay, so we are now getting close to the end. This is now top 2 territory for my top 5 books of 2025. It's a good time for you to leave a comment. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button. So, coming in at number 2. And before I tell you which book it is, the reason why this is coming up at number 2, this is actually, I think, the first book I read in 2025, is because I can't stop thinking about it. It lingers. And if you've watched this channel long enough, you know that sometimes I forget what a book is about. And so it leaves my brain after I read it. But there was just an imprint that this book left on me that will never, ever be forgotten. Okay, so without further ado, this book is The Lesson by Cadwell Turnbull. I picked up this book because I had a copy of No Gods, No Monsters, and I was just, oh, actually, no, that's a big lie. I picked this up before I had No God, No Monsters, but I read No Gods, No Monsters before I read The Lesson. And this, I think, is Cadwell Turnbull's debut novel, I want to say. And I had heard about this probably from SFF 180 from Thomas. And I had also read some blurbs about this because this was sort of like Aliens Among Us, sort of not quite First Contact, but Aliens Among Us, right? And I really like any kind of Among Us story for reasons I'll probably need to explore. Maybe with my therapist, also with you, it'll be fine. But I wanted to read this because I wanted more Turnbull, and I wanted to read a story that was decidedly about a lesson, like that maybe promised some larger theme that we should be thinking about. And of course, we know what was happening in January 2025. And so I was like, yes, let me read a book about catastrophes and humans maybe or maybe not learning lessons. And one of the critiques that I had read about this book was that it was too lofty, it was too high-handed, it was too like preachy. And I was like, I'm ready for that, because sometimes we need to be preached at. So I was open to it. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book by reading the synopsis. I'll talk to you a little bit about Cadwell Turnbull by reading his bio. I'll take you into the cover art, and then we'll talk about why I liked it so much and why it has made number 2 on my list. They will teach us the lesson all creatures must learn. An alien ship rests over Water Island. For 5 years, the people of the U.S. Virgin Islands have lived with the Ina, a race of super advanced aliens on a research mission they will not fully disclose. They are benevolent in many ways, but meet any act of aggression with disproportionate wrath. This has led to a strained relationship between the Yuna and the local Virgin Islanders, and a peace that cannot last. A year after the death of a young boy at the hands of a Yuna, 3 families find themselves at the center of the inevitable conflict, witness and victim to events that will touch everyone and teach a terrible lesson. So what I'll say about the synopsis is it is accurate. And what it didn't prepare me for was how intimate the prose would be, how much we would be inside the mind of the main characters here, how much we would understand what they were feeling and seeing and desiring and fearing throughout the story. Like, there's a lot of intimacy in this story that you couldn't tell from the blurb itself, even though the blurb was completely accurate. Okay, Cadwell Turnbull. Cadwell Turnbull is a graduate from the North Carolina State University's Creative Writing MFA in Fiction and English, MA in Linguistics. That was done poorly. He was the winner of the 2014 SCSU Prize for Short Fiction and attended Clarion West 2016. His short fiction has appeared in The Verge, Lightspeed, Nightmare, and Asimov Science Fiction. His Asimov's short story, When the Rains Come Back, made Barnes & Noble's sci-fi fantasy short fiction roundup in April 2018. His nightmare story, Loneliness is in Your Blood, was selected for the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy of 2018. His Asimov novelette, Other Worlds, and this one was also selected by the anthology as a notable story. The Lesson is his debut novel. So what you need to know is that when he writes, he wins, okay? And for good reason. Cadwell Turnbull is an amazing writer, like an amazing writer. I have now read 3 of his books, and if you watched my unboxing trio, and if you haven't watched that, go watch that and come back. I will buy anything that he's written, and I will read it, and I will probably enjoy it. He is definitely on my top 10 authors lists because he's amazing, okay? So what do I think of the cover? It's fine. Like, it's okay. There's a shell, and there's like things, you know, it's fine. It's fine. But you might like it. Like, I don't not like it. It's just fine. It's fine. The book is spectacular. The cover's fine. So what did I like about The Lesson? So there's a relationship here, as we already know, right? There's a relationship between humans and aliens. And anytime I read a story that's sort of like anything among us, aliens among us, my question is, how are we interacting? And what do we learn about humanity when we read stories that are written from the perspective of the other, right? And so the alien who we spend the most time with in this story is named Mira, and Mira has a humanoid appearance, but she's super hot, dark skin, like just gorgeous. And you know, but if you look at her too long, like you see that she's not like us, right? And there's a quality about her that's just too perfect, right? And so these aliens that Yuna have studied, like they're studying humanity. So they are living on this island, right, with all these black people, and they're living there with these black people and other people, just trying to figure out something, right? And so if we think about how humans treat other species, like how we treat animals and insects and fish, and how we have a hierarchy among animals, like some animals are okay to like squash and kill and poison, and other animals like are more sacred because we've created this like hierarchy, right? So like roaches are not as valuable as chickens, and chickens are not as valuable as like horses, and we just like have this hierarchy that we've decided makes sense, right? So it's always very interesting whenever you're reading an alien among us kind of story, because the aliens are looking at us and going like, you guys are weird. Like you're weird. Like you order yourselves into these like categories because they seem to make sense, and then you like add power, and then you like do all these kinds of things. So you say that this kind of violence is okay, but that kind of violence is not okay. And if you do this, you'll end up in jail or you end up killed by the state. But when you're killed by the state, that's totally fine because it's justified. But when you kill somebody on the street, it's not justified, and that's murder. And so like, what? How are you? What? How do you do this, right? So whenever you have an Alien Among Us story, if you want to read with purpose and you want to sort of help yourself sort of become more aware of what's going on around you, these stories can really help us ask questions about ourselves. There's sociological commentary, among other things. And so I really loved that element. But when you have that, and then you have maybe a romance between an alien and a human, then that all those questions become really intimate really quickly. And we start asking questions about power and manipulation and, like, can we bridge one group to another? Like, what are the rules? And that also is brewing in this story. I loved that this was taking place on the U.S. Virgin Islands. I love that we learn a little bit more about the culture. The cultures. I love that there are families involved and that there's sort of like treachery and betrayal. I love this sense of tension that, we're going on with our lives, but we also know that there are these aliens among us and we don't know what they're doing, but everything seems to be fine right now. Cross fingers, I don't know, maybe it's going to blow up tomorrow. Like, that tension was really satisfying for me to read. And of course, I was reading it at a time of the year, January 2025. I'm trying to say January the right way, January 2025, where, those of us in the West were kind of being like, right? So it was a wonderful read. The reason why it made number 2, let me just show you my annotations, okay? One is the lasting impact of this book. Like, this book lives the story. Can you see the annotations? I don't know if you can. Maybe this was a big fail. Okay, you can probably see the ones that were in color. But this book just lived in my imagination, and it gave me what I needed at the time, right? In terms of really trying to figure out how I want to deal with the things in our world that are feeling alien to me right now. I loved the character Mira. I loved this alien character. You can see, like, the aliens are really strong, physically strong, stronger than humans, and they have all of these powers, and so the humans are living at their pleasure, right? At the aliens' pleasure. And just to see how she was sort of trying to fit in, right? While still dominating and while still controlling, trying to fit in and trying to develop relationships. But also knowing that at the end of the day, like, they could just pull the plug and just be like, it's over, right? And it's also really interesting to see how the U.S. Virgin Islands was treated by the rest of the world and how it interacted with the rest of the world, given the fact that they've got this, like, alien invasion. And also, why would the aliens choose the U.S. Virgin Islands? Like, why there, right? So, very interesting story that still lives with me. There are some scenes that I still remember, and the ending was really complicated and also sweet. So this was my number 2 book of 2025. I would definitely recommend it if you're ready for an Aliens Among Us story, if you're okay with a little bit of love, ish, adjacent feelings, and if you want to ask some questions about, like, what are we really doing on this planet and should we be doing it differently? Good book. Okay, everyone, the battery is in. And now it's time for my favorite book of 2025. If you would like a challenge, you could pause the video right here and go back to all the books I read in 2025. It's long. There were 3 videos. Sorry. But you can watch all of them and look at what I've read so far and maybe guess what you think my favorite book of 2025 was. And I will say that when I need some water. When I put this list together, actually not when I put the list together, but when I was putting together my like list of all the books I read in 2025, I thought this was a really wonderful book. Like, it was great, you know, I enjoyed it. But then as I went back to my notes and went back to the books and looked at my story graph, also leave Goodreads and go to Storygraph, and also be my friend on Storygraph. When I went through all of that, I was like, this was an incredible book. Like, it was incredible. And the narrator was great. I hybrid read it. Like, it gave me everything that I wanted. There was the liminality of it all. There was a mother-daughter relationship. There was like ancestors. There's like nature. I love when there is a natural element to magic, like the trees, the wind, the river, right? I absolutely loved that. What I didn't mention with the Reformatory was that there was a lot of nature magic. And in Lone Woman, nature magic. So this book rose to the top of my list as I examined the books that I read, thought about what my purpose for reading was in 2025, what left a lasting impact, and what I would recommend. Okay, without further ado, my favorite book of 2025 was Let Us Descend by Jesmyn Ward. Okay, so what I'm going to do, like I've done with all the other books, is I'm going to tell you about the book by reading the synopsis and making a few comments. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the author, and then I'm going to take you to the cover, and then we'll get into why I love this book so much and why it was my favorite book of 2025. Let Us Descend is a reimagining of American slavery as beautifully rendered as it is heart-wrenching. Searching, harrowing, replete with transcendent love, the novel is a journey from the rice fields of the Carolinas to the slave markets of New Orleans and into the fearsome heart of a Louisiana sugar plantation. Annis, sold south by the white enslaver who fathered her, is the reader's guide through this hellscape. As she struggles through the miles-long march, Annis turns inward, seeking comfort from memories of her mother and stories of her African warrior grandmother. Throughout, she opens herself to a world beyond this world, one teeming with spirits, of earth and water, of myth and history, spirits who nurture and give, and those who manipulate and take. While Ward leads readers through the descent, this, her fourth novel, is ultimately a story of rebirth and reclamation. From the most singularly brilliant and beloved writers of her generation, this miracle of a book inscribes Black American grief and joy into the very land, the rich but unforgiving forests, swamps, and rivers of the American South. Let Us Descend is Jesmyn Ward's most magnificent novel yet, a masterwork for the ages. I don't know that I have more to say about this. Accurate, loved it. That is all. Let me tell you about Jesmyn Ward. Jesmyn Ward received her MFA from the University of Michigan and has received the MacArthur Genius Grant, a Stegner Fellowship, a John and Renee Grisham Writers Residency, the Strauss Living Award, and the 2022 Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. She's the winner of 2 National Book Awards for Fiction for Sing and Buried Sing in 2017 and Salvage the Bones 2011. She is also the author of the novel Where the Line Bleeds and the memoir Men We Reaped, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and won the Chicago Tribune Heartland Prize and the Media for a Just Society Award. She is currently a professor of creative writing at the Tulane University and lives in Mississippi. This is the first Jesmyn Ward book that I read. I remember when Sing Unburied Sing came on the scene. That was when I had first started booktube and I'd heard a lot about it, but I never sort of got to it. But when I read the synopsis for Let Us Descend, I was just like, I think this is where I want to start with her writing. So the cover, we've got a yellow background, we've got these bees. What is it about bees? Lots of bees. And if you look really closely, the bees, the shape of the bee is actually like made up of a collage. And so yes, very, very simple cover, okay? So why did I love this book? I loved this book because it was about a journey ultimately. And as I'm thinking about it, it kind of gives me similar feelings to The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates, right? Like there's this this kind of this magic that emerges because it's needed, right? Help will come. Help will come, right? This is difficult, but help will come. And help is all around us. I loved the relationship between the generations of women in this story. I loved how the main character, who we first meet as a teenager, is being protected to the best of her mother's ability. And I love the way her mother does whatever she can to prepare her child for a grim future without her. And aren't mothers, well, not all mothers are doing that. My mother did that. She's still doing that. And some of us are blessed to have mothers who do that. And this reminded me of that sometimes we don't fully understand what our mothers are doing and how they're trying to prepare us with the skills that they have, with all that they have. And I have a mother who does that. And sometimes I don't understand her, but I love her and I know she loves me. And this story just really helped me. Maybe this is why I loved it, because it really helped me to sort of reconnect with my mom. And to understand that our ancestors are present and they live in us, and as cliche as this sounds, they're watching over us, and sometimes they're aiding us in ways that we might not be able to appreciate or even name, but they're there. And help will come, right? That's all I can say about this book, is this: help will come, help can come. And I loved the way that Jesmyn Ward so poetically, so beautifully, so lyrically took us into this really difficult moment of African American history and still forced us to see the beauty of it, and to not the beauty of what was happening, not that, but to see how help came, right? And I think, when I think about my ancestors in the Caribbean and on the continent of Africa and how they survived colonization, I don't even know how they did it. I don't know how they did it, but I know how they did it. Help came. Help always comes. I annotated the life out of this book, so I'll show you. Okay. I feel like I wish I had more to say about it. But I think what you need to do with Let Us Descend is read it, and I think that the glory of this story is in surrendering into the descent. Like, there is a descent. We do start with the main character in this sort of this life that's horrible because she's living on a plantation. And we see her and a world that her mother and the women in her community have tried to make around her to cocoon her with. And then we see her leaving that world, not by her choice. Nothing was by her choice. So we see her leaving that, and we see her having to go somewhere worse, right? She's going down. She's going south. She is being sold down the river. And as she's making this journey by foot, something happens. And it's dark and it's beautiful and it's magical. So, friends, I wish I could get more into it, but it is just the visceral experience of this character and this book. And it was my #1 book of 2025. Okay, I have 2 honorable mentions that I would like to share before we go. And the first is Chocolate Chip City by B. Steadwell, and the other is Sky Full of Elephants by Sibo Campbell. These are honorable mentions. They did not make my top 5 list, but there was something about them that was really memorable that I just want to share with you. So in terms of Chocolate Chip City, this is a debut, sweet, cozy, romantic, magical story about 3 siblings. This is a debut novel by B. Steadwell. I adore B. Steadwell. I love their music. I love how they engage in community. I love the way they engage in the arts. Like, they are just like an artist through and through and through and through. They recently got married. Also, congratulations on your marriage. I know it was a while ago, but like, congratulations on your love. And if you are interested in listening to their music, they're all over the internets. But my favorite song is one that they wrote for the Octavia E. Butler slow read, inspired by Wild Seed, and it is stunning. So there's that. So this is about the Jones sisters. Jasmine is a queer, heartbroken baker who crafts beautiful pastries that no one in DC wants to buy. Her sister Ella is a fat and fine body worker, begrudgingly serving rich white folk. And Layla, the youngest, is an ambitious, affordable housing activist in the rapidly gentrifying district. The sisters are all conjurers, but they aren't yet sure how to use their magic, and they're not sure the world deserves it. When their mother reveals her vision of princess, true love, and revolution, the jaded sisters meet her with skepticism. But after a chance encounter with the filthy rich black developer Malcolm Scott and his 2 princely children, their mother's prophecy begins to unfold. This romantic novel explores class privilege while placing black love, queer sex, and joy at its center. This was a sweet read. It was a lot of fun. The magic was super cool, especially this opening scene. There was some spice of the physical kind that I adored. This was great. And so I would recommend that you read it. If you're somebody like me, like, I'm always somebody who cries at the end of the movie where like help comes and the community comes together and everybody's like, you know, you think all is lost and then the portal opens and all of Wakanda is there to love you and to hold you up, and they nod at you like, we got you, and then I cry. There's a moment like that here. So this was a lovely book, and I really want to thank B for sending me this arc. It was a wonderful read. Congratulations on your debut novel. Sky Full of Elephants. So I have mixed feelings about this one, but the premise was really interesting. You know, I'll just read it. And it was blurbed by Tananarive, right? So interesting. In a world without white people, what does it mean to be black? Okay, so just off the bat, an interesting question, right? One day, a cataclysmic event occurs. All the white people in America walk into the nearest body of water. A year later, Charlie Brunton is a black man living in an entirely new world. Having served time in prison after a wrongful conviction, he's now a professor of electric and solar power systems at Howard University when he receives a call from someone he wasn't even sure existed, his daughter. Sydney, a 19-year-old left behind by her white mother and stepfamily. Traumatized by the event and terrified of the outside world, Sydney has spent a year in isolation in Wisconsin. Desperate for help, she turns to the father she never knew, a man she's always resented. Sydney and Charlie meet for the first time as they embark on a journey across a truly post-racial America in search of answers. But neither of them is prepared for this new world and how they see themselves in it. Heading south toward what is called now the Kingdom of Alabama, everything Charlie and Sydney thought they knew about themselves and the world will be turned upside down. Brimming with heart and humor, Sibo Campbell's astonishing debut novel is about the power of community and connection, healing and self-actualization. It's a reckoning with what it means to be black in America in both Charlie's world and in ours. Just from the perspective of the speculative, right? So whenever we're reading Black speculative fiction, you're always looking for the what if question, right? What if this happened? What if that happened? What if this hadn't happened? What would happen then, right? So the what if. And consider the fact that science fiction, until very, very recently, always imagined a world where there were no Black people, right? We weren't in space, we weren't on the ground, we just weren't there, right? And we are living inside an imagination where there are certain pockets of our lives, of the world, certain dimensions of the world, where Black people are not imagined, right? Our existence is completely wiped out in the imagination. And that imagination, without us, is fed back to us, and it's called reality. For me, I was really interested in this like what happened after this event, after this catastrophe. And it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't executed in the best way. In my opinion, this book was more about Sydney's journey than it was about her father. And it failed in the end for me, in terms of the large question, right? That large question, it didn't answer that for me. And I enjoyed this book. I enjoyed what it attempted. I enjoyed several of the characters. I enjoyed the story of it all. There was some humor. There was some, a little bit of magic. There's a lot of like the speculative, the unknown. There's a lot of mystery. There was a lot of tension, and I enjoyed it. But it didn't make my top 5 because of those questions that didn't quite get answered for me. I needed it to stay a little bit more grounded, and it didn't, and then I just felt kind of out there. So yeah, those are 2 books I wanted to mention to you. So there you have it. Those were the best books of 2025 that I read. If you have watched this video all the way to the end, I would love 5 stacks of books and maybe 2 other emojis to represent the honorable mentions. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for requesting it. It was a pleasure to do. It wasn't easy, but I hope that you enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see you in the comments and hear what you have to say about these books. And if you'd like to tell me the top 5 books or the top book or the best and worst book that you read in 2025, I would absolutely love to hear it. Remember, as always, to read with purpose, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye, everyone.